The race is on, and with 3 races in the history books and a big break in the calendar, it's time to zero in on what we've learned about the strengths and weaknesses of the 11 F1 cars, and of course, the all-important power units. I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to sift through everything we've picked up so far are Mark Hughes and Scott Mitchell-Malm. Right, Mark, before we start getting into the detail, how difficult, how steep has the learning curve been for you in terms of trying to understand all this, given the challenge of the power units, both in terms of understanding what's going on there and how that interacts with the underlying characteristics of the chassis?
Yeah, well, it's changed that relationship between what's really driving the competitive order. The power unit has assumed vastly more importance, hasn't it? And it obviously downforce and balance are always going to be important, but in terms of the percentages, they're less so than they were, and it's become very, very power unit dominated, especially in these early stages where there's a big spread between the performance of the various power units. Each of the 3 races so far has given us slightly different things to learn about. Some of the teams are learning some of these things for the first time, but also in terms of what we're seeing, there's like different layouts and different characteristics which are just giving us new insights into some of the nuances of this formula.
And one of the things, Scott, that we've been doing so much in the paddock is just trying to understand all of this, isn't it? Running around, picking up the quirks of the power unit, trying to work out what's in control of the drivers and teams, what's outside of the control, why things are happening, how that influences all the other aspects of the car. So it's almost like a completely different thing, isn't it? All of those assumptions and those foundations for evaluating performance of cars in the past actually has shifted quite dramatically.
Yeah, and I would say maybe sort of 20% of what I'm asking people is kind of checking what I already thought I knew, because you then have something happen in reality that you're then trying to be like, okay, well, is that what I think it is, or is something else happening there? And you also hear driver characterizations of certain things, certain problems, certain limitations, and you think, okay, well, is that related to this particular engine quirk, or is that a car package thing? And it becomes so that's sort of like an almost distracting exercise in itself, having to kind of sense check a lot of stuff. But I find that one of the inevitable directions F1's gone in over the last, I would say, 10 years or so, probably longer, but I've noticed it a lot in the last 10 years that I've been working in Formula One, is like a big emphasis on a package. So works teams, for example, not wanting to separate car and engine, customer teams maybe being quite, reverential towards their engine supplier or whatever. But this year's just blown that out of the water, because this year it is the engine is such a massive driver of everything we see, and a big influence on everything that the driver can do and the car can do, that separating that is harder than ever. So trying to work out, for example, for this podcast, what are your strengths and weaknesses of the various packages, everything goes hand in hand between engine and car.
Yeah, and unravelling that is a massive challenge, very, very interesting one as well, and really was the genesis of this whole podcast. If nothing else, it's just a good opportunity for us to review and go over it, and it's almost
look like fools.
Oh, exactly. There's a bit of that, but it's also almost just coincidence that hopefully it makes a nice, interesting, listenable to podcast, because we're still on a very steep learning curve. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the 11 teams. We're going to pick out a single strength and weakness for each of them. So that's going to be the key conclusion. Doesn't mean we can't talk about other aspects, but we want to get to the end and have basically a box that says strength and weakness for each individual team. And it can be power unit or team related, but they can't just all be power unit, because that would get quite boring. So we're trying to bring a bit of art to it, and we'll go through it in engine supplier blocks. So we'll start off with the works team, if you like, and talk about that as a package, and that'll establish the power unit characteristics, then skip through the customer team. So first up, Mark, Mercedes, the works team. It obviously is very fast. You can't have that. You've got to get a bit more into the detail. So take it away.
Obviously, it's been the dominant car so far. It does have the best power unit, but it shares that power unit with 3 other teams. So there must be some reason other than just that it's got the best power unit. And I think when you look at its performance profile has some interesting things about it. It seems very, very efficient at harvesting, particularly in the braking phase. It's as if it has more downforce to exploit at the rear. In Mercedes' DNA for the last year and a bit has been fantastic traction, and that's continued onto this car. And I think there may be a mechanical reason for that that also explains why it's so good at harvesting under braking. So I think harvesting efficiency, but it's interesting the way that it's set up. It's almost like the whole package in terms of its gearing and the harvesting software has been optimized around the ultimate qualifying time. So that mindset of making sure you qualify at the front and then get out and up front. But when it's in traffic, it's not as usable in terms of its deployment and where it harvests. It's not as usable as the Ferrari, and so you see it get stuck in traffic a little bit. And so I think what you got to also consider in that picture is its gearing. It's very long geared. It's running by far the longest top gear, and I would assume that it's geared down from that starting point, as it were. So I think it's overall longer geared, and with that, it will be very efficient in harvesting it, especially under super clipping, because it would just be going faster for the same revs. But I think it's might also be contributing towards those poor starts. It's probably just a little bit longer geared overall. It has a bigger turbo. We don't know how much bigger, but it has a bigger turbo than the Ferrari. And I think a combination of a big turbo and quite high gearing would tend to make it difficult off the line, probably make it a little bit less raceable in traffic. But once you get it up and running, it will be very quick. And I think that's partly why it's so good. So I think it's got a great power unit, but so have three others. It's got very good downforce, which helps you harvest more efficiently. And there's a very close relationship now, much closer than before, between downforce and harvesting efficiency. And yeah, I think its gearing is part of why it's fast when it's in clear air.
So I guess we want to say for a weakness, maybe deployment optimization in the race.
Yeah.
That's probably the weakness. And strength wise, it's kind of everything, isn't it? What's the 4-word version of that?
I think I would summarize it as basically they've mastered the integration. I think that's the way I would. I know it's a bit vague, but the obviously as a summary, it kind of has to serve that purpose. But it's as Mark said, the fact that others have got the engine and Mercedes is still blowing them out of the water. It has a car that it clearly hasn't compromised around the engine demands in the sense that, it's left too much performance on the table. McLaren, which is the second best Mercedes team, believes that it is a few tenths behind on chassis to Mercedes. As Mark said, the way that it is able to charge the battery and maximize harvesting, it almost feels like that car, the way I don't know if it goes as far as the way they've designed it, but certainly the way they seem to set it up and run it, they seem to want to use the harvesting as a key part of the way that the car handles braking zones, corner entries, and whatnot. And when everything is absolutely as Mercedes needs it to be, it's the number one package in every area. So I think it's just been. That's why I say it's mastered the integration. The flip side of that, the weakness, I would agree, is that it comes unstuck when it can't do. It all comes unstuck when it can't do what it wants to do. When it's not able to run by design, it doesn't quite work. The safety car restarts, for example, are clearly a problem. Running in traffic seems to catch it out. So it's probably two sides of the same coin, isn't it? It's got everything so nicely, finely poised based on where it ideally wants to run, which is at the front of the field. Then when it doesn't run at the front of the field, all of that goodness can't come to the fore because that's not where it's designed to operate.
Yeah, and that fits with a pattern that we've seen from Mercedes before when they were dominant previously. They, in the early days of the first few years of the hybrid formula, they used to have a car with very small front brake ducts, just on the assumption that it was going to qualify at the front and run in clean air. But when it got beaten off the start or didn't qualify in the front row, you would see them having to really, really manage brake temperatures because we're very marginal. So again, it's that assumption. No, we're going to design everything, we're going to optimize this car around the assumption that it's going to be the fastest. And it's that confidence that seems to have reappeared in the conception of this car.
Yeah, so that I think gives us a nice sort of efficient integration of aero and harvest characteristics. Let's sum it up as that. Let's move on to McLaren now, Scott.
Yes, it is obviously, for starters, as I just said, a few tenths down on Mercedes. So as a car, it's not perfectly optimized. It was a design that McLaren made a big thing in pre-season about pushing the development as much as possible for the start of the year, so that would be a nicely evolved platform to run the opening races with. That's why what it launched with effectively and then ran through testing is more or less what it has started with. But it has become quite clear that I don't think it's a particularly mature evolution in terms of getting all of the goodness out of the car. McLaren believes it is a very, very high potential aerodynamic platform that they have. So on the chassis side, they believe that there is a lot of headroom. And I wonder if, I mean, it's hard to say because obviously it feels a bit of an intangible thing to label as the strength. I feel like it seems to be a car that's got good DNA. I don't see any. I haven't seen or heard anything from the opening races where, other than the fact that it's just a little bit slower everywhere, there doesn't seem to be. Feel free to correct me, guys, but it doesn't seem to be that there's like a really horrible chassis weakness somewhere where it's it's okay, it's here that it gets caught out. I feel like at the moment it needs a little bit of a lift to get the most out of absolutely everything. And I think the Suzuka track surface and the grip there was maybe an example of that. So if you were going to say anything on that score, it's just ultimately lacking that little bit of extra grip, and certain circumstances can kind of mask that. But it's it's a solid starting point rather than maybe what we'd have expected in previous years from a world champion team.
With the McLaren, it hasn't changed since we first saw it. There's been no visible development on it, and we're expecting quite a significant upgrade come Miami. But the one thing that stands out of McLaren, it's a short car. It's 10 to 12 centimeters shorter than the Mercedes and most of the others, with the shorter gearbox. I think in concept, the idea is that it works that flaw that it has super hard, and you look at some of the detail on the wing end plates and the vortice creating surfaces there are very, very complex, and I think that's the concept, is to try and overcome the shorter floor, because by definition there's less downforce creating underfloor, to work it harder. And I think that's where you're going to see the development being concentrated. But I think it's just generically down on downforce compared to the Mercedes, partly as a consequence probably of that shorter floor. So that they wanted to do that, partly they were pushed in that direction to do that, partly because they wanted to get down to the weight, the thought that it might be very, very difficult to get down to the weight limit with a full-length car, and whether they've underestimated how successful teams like Mercedes may have been in getting down to that weight limit. Even with a full-length car, we don't really know yet, but it certainly doesn't appear to be a problem on the Mercedes. So possibly McLaren have got themselves into a little bit of a corner with that, and that's obviously just part and parcel of the concept of the car. It's not something that's going to change. It's pretty good in slow corners, which you'd be consistent with a short wheelbase car. It's also shorter geared than the Mercedes, so it's you see it's much better off the line So I think just in combination, it's quite a different concept in terms of its downforce and its gearing to the Mercedes. And as things at the current level of development, it's just a little bit off. It's on average about half a second off in qualifying.
So should we go with downforce deficit as the weakness and good low speed performance as the strength? Scott, happy with that?
Yeah, I think so. It's maybe best characterised as a reasonably nippy, agile little bugger in low speed corners and off the line and whatnot.
I'm just imagining Andrea Stella using that particular phrasing. Let's see if we can encourage him to do that in his next media briefing. He has a good phrase in him, Stella, actually, I have to say.
I'll ask him if there's an Italian phrase that's the equivalent of nippy little bugger.
Yes. I'm sure he always likes to expand the vocabulary as well. So perhaps we can, both learn from it. Right, who is it next? It's Alpine, isn't it? Your turn, Mark.
Yeah, the Alpine is about 7/10 off the McLaren, so second and a bit off the Mercedes for the same power unit, and it's starting to get better. We saw it Suzuka and China to an extent. Gasly was able to get some sort of tune out of it. It's a pitching there for best of the rest after Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, but it's quite a bit behind. It looked as if initially it had quite a narrow, balanced sweet spot between low speed and high, and Colapinto still seems to be struggling a little bit with that. But Gasly seems to be able to get it into that spot, and then feels confident in it to really lean on it. It's just when you compare its GPS trace to a McLaren, it's all in medium to high speed. So it just suggests that just down in downforce numbers to the McLaren, which in turn is down in downforce numbers to the Mercedes. So, yeah, good power unit, obviously. It's still. I think there's looking at the trajectory, it looks like there's still quite a lot to come. It looks like it's on the early part of an improvement curve. So, I wouldn't write it off yet, but it's about as far off the McLaren as the McLaren is off the Mercedes, probably a little bit more. So that's where that sits at the moment, which translates as 7th, 8th on the grid. And Gasly seems to be able to be putting it there. So from there, you can get a few points, and hopefully the development program can find a bit more pace.
So presumably going strength Mercedes power unit, and the weakness is the high speed, because it has got that front end weakness, which actually they're hoping to fix pretty much next time out, aren't they? So that could be quite good news for Alpine. And they certainly mitigated it. The problem is less of a problem than it was in Bahrain testing and in Australia, at least. They did take a good step in China in particular. So, yeah, that makes that a handy little midfield package with potentially more to come. Right, Williams, Scott. I suspect this one, it's going to be quite easy to hit on a weakness for Williams, I think. It's very well known.
Yes, we could ask. I mean, we need weaknesses, really, for Williams. It's heavy and it's poorly balanced, I think, would be my kind of basic summary of a car that is, from what I've heard, pushing close to a second in lap time purely on weight. So there you're looking at, based on, I think the usual kind of reference isn't quite accurate, because I think actually weight's probably more costly now in this energy limited formula. But I would say, giving away maybe up to a second in lap time just on weight alone, you're looking at, I think, the better part of 25 to 30 kilos over the weight limit potentially, at the upper limit of like the worst case scenario. I would say it's in that range. We don't know for sure. That is obviously just pure lap time. That will not be helping at all with the way that it runs the car, the agility of the car, speed, every single part of the lap, acceleration, mid-corner balance, braking, of course. And then on top of that is the persistent three-wheeling issue, which is a literal phenomenon in racing, where you end up picking up the inside front or the inside rear wheel just through the load transfer through the corners when the car isn't just the mechanically balanced well enough. In this context, I think it is more of a it's more descriptive than literal. It's the sensation of freewheeling as the load comes off both the inside front and the inside rear, depending on what the corner is, which is that's even worse than just what we thought it would be. And basically, as the car, I guess, moves around through the corner, it's always had this. It's a long-standing Williams DNA problem in these long medium-speed corners, in particular. The car basically shifts off the inside front or the inside rear. The contact patch is reduced, and then grip is reduced as a result of that. It also impacts the aerodynamic performance of the car in corner, because then the car isn't as evenly sprung, basically, all the way through this kind of corner state. So it is a car that has deep problems that are causing massive losses in lap time. If you're saying that the engine is the good thing about the Alpine, obviously that goes double for Williams. The one thing I would argue in potential mitigation, and in the interest of us trying to come up with the most informative but also interesting descriptions and performance profiles of these cars, maybe the best thing about the Williams is it is at least a fairly aggressive design. You can see it in the way that the car's pitched. I don't know if it'll end up working. I'm slightly worried that two of the worst performing cars on the grid, just in terms of the way the cars behave, are the Williams and the Aston Martin, and both of them have quite a lot of rake. So maybe that hasn't been quite the glory return of high rake cars as some people were pitching the 2026 rules at. But if you're looking at it, at least it's not. My point is that it's a car that's got a lot of evil in it, but it's not like, you don't look at it and go, oh, but it's a really conventional 2026 F1 car. It's got something different about it. So then the question is, can you kind of can you wind back some of that nastiness and then tap into the theoretical goodness of the package, or is that nastiness inherently linked to the way that the car is set up mechanically and pitched in terms of its rake setup?
Yeah, so I guess we could say a strength maybe is aero potential, aerodynamics, because if you knock the weight penalty off, it does put them among the front of the midfielders, which is, if Williams is at the front of the midfield, you say, yeah, that's fine, isn't it? That's kind of where they should be. You'd like to see a little bit more, but that's not bad. And yeah, weakness, weight, I guess, has to be the first order one, doesn't it? But we are expecting to see a significant amount of weight coming off in Miami. Exactly how much, we don't know. So that problem, that weakness will reduce, and then traction problems and that kind of thing will, I guess, come to the fore.
Three-wheeling boat.
What a phrase. That's another good one. See if we can get Andrea Stella to use that as well. What do you think of the Williams, Andrea? Right, that's the Mercedes teams done and dusted. Well, let's move on to part 2 now and start talking about the Red Bull powered teams. Those of you watching on video will probably spot that things have changed a little bit. We had a bit of a technical drama, but we're picking up for part 2. So we've had a bit of a gap and a time to think about things. So that's always fun to have a bit of a break in recording. Scott, Red Bull.
Yes. Among the top teams, certainly a lot more to kind of criticize, especially if you're one of the drivers, than there is to think that there is a huge abundance of goodness. If we start with the power unit, what was very clear from testing and then into Australia is it does seem to be an engine that is it's pretty good with the charging and deployment demands, and that has continued through the next couple of events. There's not a huge amount that the drivers, certainly in Red Bull Racing, but I think also for the sister team too, have that's negative to say about the engine. That it's not something that has been spoken about a huge amount by technical people since the season started, which is a bit of a frustration, especially given the all new formula. One thing I have wondered, having looked at the way the first few weekends played out, is whether or not it's one of the reasons it's decent on the deployment, the charging and deployment side, is if it's lacking just that ultimate little bit of punch compared to the Mercedes in particular, but also the the Ferrari, I wonder if I've got no evidence to suggest that it's not kind of deploying to the maximum capacity over a lap, but if it's all not quite as intricate or absolutely exploited to the maximum of the others, is there potentially just a small percentage of margin that it has versus the other manufacturers that just means it's not quite as sensitive to those particularly energy starved circuits? I don't know. I wish I knew for certain, but I think it's telling that the drivers seemed happiest with the relative performance of the engine in Australia and Japan, where that energy demand was much more significant than it was in China. That is obviously not to say that it's immune to any of that, but that does seem to be, I think, the baseline for the engine. It seems to be not quite as strong as Mercedes and Ferrari, but it does seem to be holding its own on the energy management side. There's no grave deficit there. In terms of weaknesses, though, there's a lot more that can be said about a car that seems to be massively shifting in balance and not inspiring a huge amount of confidence for either driver. And you look at how weak it was in the first sector at Suzuka, probably told you everything you needed to know about the weaknesses on the chassis side. It's another car that's heavy, but it's also just doesn't seem to be working particularly predictably in an aerodynamic sense.
Yeah, the whole ERS thing's interesting with Red Bull because they seem to be really good when it's over a lap. You can see trends where it's closer to what Mercedes can do than, say, some of the other power units, but then they get a little bit more trouble in racing scenarios. So actually that kind of maps a little bit onto Mercedes. So yeah, I think we can probably say, should we say ERS in quali for the strength, and then do we want to hit on a specific thing? Because it seems to have persistent mid-corner understeer, doesn't it? That seems to be the thing they can't shift, and everything else they kind of move around, don't they? The limitation goes to one end or the other in one part of the corner or other, but always with the mid-corner understeer.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And I think on the power unit side, it seems to be unrefined, even though it's quite efficient. It just seems sometimes that it doesn't deliver in the way that the driver would want. Certainly when you listen to Verstappen in China during the race, it was just not. I think it's quite effective in terms of deployment and harvesting, but not always on demand. It's a little bit clunky, let's say, a little bit unrefined.
I would say that the biggest thing really on the negatives is that it's a really bad reflection on the car that the engine isn't the weakest part of this package, because it should be. The Red Bull powertrain side, they've done a fantastic job to build up what they have in the time, and I definitely don't want to play down the job they've done there. I want to play up the challenge. This should have tripped Red Bull up, and so it obviously could have, but I honestly think it should have tripped Red Bull up more than it has. So to have what looks just like comfortably, I would say, the third best engine. I don't think it's quite as good as the Mercedes or the Ferrari overall, even though it does look pretty good in certain situations compared to them. I think it's better than the Audi and certainly the Honda, obviously. But it's been badly let down on the car side. Not for the first time. It's a technical organisation that has struggled at the start of rules with a heavy car and not quite got it exactly where it needs to be. And yeah, that's a big worry, frankly, for Red Bull, for all of the supposed progress last year and what that was meant to do in terms of the lessons and the tool set and whatnot. So I don't know quite how you would wrap that up neatly into either the strengths or the weaknesses. Maybe the strength is that the engine isn't the weakness.
Well, it's kind of the engine isn't the weakness and the car is the weakness. So, yeah, should we just put car for the weakness and just make it, because it's got multiple characteristics that are not working. So let's say ERS effectiveness as a strength, even though there's a little bit of a question mark in certain race conditions. And then we'll just make the car the weakness. Let's go all out. So we can go broad on that one. Right, Mark, Racing Bulls.
Racing Bulls has got very similar traits. It's a bit understeery, especially on the softer compound of tyres. It's difficult to get into a balance window. It's probably not got quite as much downforce as you look at where it typically loses out in lap time. It's about 4/10 off on average in a qualifying, and that's interestingly that you'd normally say, yeah, but there'll be some Verstappen factor in that. But actually, two of the Red Bull times have been from Hadjar, so you can't even say that at the moment. I don't think the Red Bull is a car that's allowing Verstappen to work his magic. So I think we're just looking at a pretty standard offset, really. So yeah, I think it has the same sort of pattern of behavior as the Red Bull. It's not bad when you get it into the window, but it's it's certainly not one of those nice drivable cars that VCarb have produced in the last 2 years, where the driver could really feel confident and push it and hustle it. This one requires a bit more work to get it in that sweet spot, a bit more like a traditional Red Bull, in fact, of the last few years, where you can get it somewhere good, but it needs a bit of work.
Okay, so we've got tricky balance window as the weakness. I guess the strength we want to zero in on properly. What would you say, Mark, is the quick summary of the key strength?
It's reasonably quick when it's in that balance window. It's about on par with a Haas and an Audi. So it's you can get it into Q3. We've seen it it's possible to get it into Q3, I think.
Yeah, I would say it's got a good peak if you can find it. That's how I would describe the racing balls. The fact that Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad have both demonstrated that now across different circuits, and that is arguably where it has the kind of closest relationship to its predecessors, in that it has been able to do the lap time everywhere. I mean, the race pace was quite poor at Suzuka. I don't know if it got caught up in some of that engine, the sort of low-level engine misery in the race, in similar way to Hadjar, for example, in the Red Bull in particular. But I don't think there's a concern that car can't be quick in the midfield. So yeah, that's why I would say a good contender for the strength is how quick the car can be.
Okay, so yeah, let's go good peak and tricky balance window as the strength and the weakness, respectively. Right, let's move on to the Ferrari teams now. And first up, Mark, Ferrari itself.
Yeah, well, the Ferrari is a very interesting car this year, isn't it? It's a great start line performance and acceleration out of slow corners. It's made it super, super raceable, and we've seen them really, use that to their advantage over the Mercedes. It's like the opposite set of traits to the Mercedes, really. So small turbo, so very responsive, very quick off the line. It's not a new thing for Ferrari to go smaller on turbo. There was smaller on turbo in the previous regulation set as well, but it's become more of a distinguishing feature under these regs. So it's a nice drivable car. It hasn't got the sheer horsepower of the Mercedes PU, and as a result, it eats its energy more quickly. It's its electrical energy more quickly, and so it's not as efficient, but it's a more raceable car in traffic. You can do more with it.
So should we say strength, raceability, weakness, horsepower deficit? Does that sound good to you, Scott?
Yeah, I think so, especially as raceability does cover sort of the sort of various aspects of it, doesn't it? The potency off the line, how race ready it looks for the safety car restarts. But I do think that punch off the corners, even if the ultimate peak is just a little bit lacking, I think that's quite handy. It maybe builds a little bit of a buffer when there's a car chasing it, and it also allows it to latch onto the gearbox of the car ahead. So I think that's quite a neat summary.
Let's go on to Haas now. What do you make of them, Scott?
The strength, and in the nicest way possible, I think the strength is it's a wonderfully boring midfield car. There's a lot to like about that. It looks I don't think it's been the easiest car to get on top of in Japan, for example, but again, I think the usability of it across 3 different circuits, the potential that it's had, its point scoring capacity, I would say it's probably I'm just trying to think. I don't want to get caught out on, like a Haas of yesteryear, but I think it's definitely one of the more benign Haas cars, which sometimes, if you think back 12 months, when they were bringing the very effective upgrades in season on the Haas, it did make the car hard to hang on to at times, and Ollie Behrman had to work some magic to get the best out of it. It had a wonderful peak, but could be testing the limits of Behrman's very, very highly regarded ability to withstand rear instability. I don't think this is a Haas that demands that quite to the same level. So it functions very, very well for a midfield car. It inspires enough confidence and is brisk enough that it's a good qualifying threat. It seems to also hold its own in race trim. In fact, I would argue it's a slightly better car in race trim than it is in qualifying. But I will also caveat by saying that is primarily based on gut feeling and memory of the first 3 races, which could be disproven by any particular data that the two of you have come armed with. The only question mark I have over it is I'm not sure it's the quickest car in the midfield. I don't think it's outright the most rapid, but I think it's a car that could maybe be that on its day, but maybe the best thing about it is that it's always going to be like a sort of top 2, top 3 midfield car.
Yeah, there is a clear offset between qualifying and race pace. If you look at it, they're actually the 8th fastest on average. They're the slowest of the 4 midfield cars. And if you just do it based on what we call our super times, our single lap pace judgment, you've basically got Racing Bulls, Alpine and Audi are all near as makes no difference identical. They're all 1.8 off, whereas actually the Haas is 2% off. So not a massive amount, but then there are times when the car's really, really quick in the race. So I actually think qualifying pace is the weakness. And yeah, the strength is just that it's a good all-round car. Good. You must have a good usable spread of downforce.
I should have just gone all in on my declaration then and just claimed that I knew that from the start. But it's handy for once for the data to back up my gut feeling rather than massively undermine it. But I want to be nothing if not honest and just admit that was something that it certainly, anecdotally, clearly it sunk into my subconsciousness.
Well, that's the scientific method, isn't it? Hypothesis and then test it with data and ideally experiments. And what's the rest of the season if it's not a great experiment in car performance? That's good for the knowledge bucket, certainly. Right, Mark, shall I talk about Cadillac?
Cadillac is pretty much where everyone expected to be. It's within the cut-off of being not having to get special permission to qualify, but it is the slowest car. Sometimes it's the Aston Martin, but we know why that is. It's a big proportion of that is power unit. With the Cadillac, it doesn't have that, so it's basically this brand new entity starting out on a journey, and it's starting solidly at the back in terms of aero performance. Its reliability hasn't been fantastic either, so development has probably been slowed a little bit by it. It turns up and it qualifies at 105% or something like that, and it finished at the last race. So yeah, very, very early days. Nothing particularly much was expected of it in this first season, and it's about where it was expected to be.
Yeah, I'd even argue fractionally better than it was expected to be, certainly than where I expected it to be. So pretty simple, really. I think the weakness is just downforce, just well off, and strength it's the Ferrari engine, isn't it? That's just the thing that helps them. That's the big difference between Cadillac as a startup team compared to, say, one in ages past, when you might have had an engine that was 50, 70, 100 horsepower off.
I think actually we could probably narrow it down and be a bit more specific for Cadillac itself when it comes to a strength. But it's a word that I've already used annoyingly literally just now for the Haas, but maybe that's one of the reasons why it come to mind. But it's actually quite a benign car, and I don't think that's a bad thing to be for a new team that's at the back of the grid. Now, the big caveat is that it's when you want to really add load and you get sensitive with all of your flow structures and and everything that goes into that, a benign car can suddenly become a very unbalanced car. And one of the things that they're very wary of now as they look to bring what I think could be quite a big upgrade package in Miami is, right, what nastiness are you going to inject into it? And you could argue that it's better to have a car that's difficult to drive but shows more potential than it is to try and make a, well-balanced car fast if it is just well-balanced because it's slow and it's not on the edge. But as a comparison, because Mark mentioned the Aston Martin, I don't think that, let's say both teams on a theoretical lap of 3 seconds off. Obviously, a bigger percentage of that 3 seconds is going to be engine for Aston than it is for Cadillac. The car side's a lot bigger than people, I think, have assumed at the start of the year on Aston. Like, it's not a car that is doing good things, particularly at high speed. The drivers are constantly complaining about it. Lance Stroll in particular. I haven't heard that from the Cadillac drivers as such. They are missing load, and everything they do at the moment is about adding load. But I think it's a strength of that car and that team that it is starting life in F1 with a fairly usable car. It's clearly one that both drivers can push, and I think that's a solid foundation to try to add pure aerodynamic load to, and then we will judge whether they are able to do that effectively. But right now, cautiously optimistic, that's a strength of the package.
Yeah, and I think there is performance to be had just in tidying things up. Even just simple stuff like bodywork finish and just making sure all the aero parts are exactly as they should be. It's all new processes that have led to this building up. So that's one of the things they can do in this gap, kind of smooth that all out and get everything correlating better. So there could also be benefits there that will be seen even without changing the car, but there will be what Perez called a big upgrade in Miami. But yeah, it's interesting because you can see the car kind of does things and you see corrections, but it's not like a chronic problem anywhere or a massive balance thing, which the drivers have consistently, right from testing, been happy about. And of course, we've actually done a lot of trackside observations, which is part of, in particular, what we do for the Race Members Club as well. We do loads of that during testing and in particular the early races, but also through the season. Hit the link in the episode description to find out a little bit more about the Race Members Club, or head to Patreon and search for the race, because we do loads of extra stuff, in-car insights, podcasts, we do driver rankings, Q&As, so much stuff. And particularly in this break where there's no F1 going on, we love it because we've got a list the length of which you cannot believe in terms of how much we want to do for the Race Members Club. So there's loads of stuff we'll be doing that we've wanted to do for a while in this gap, and we'll keep it coming. So both on weekends and outside of them, loads of interest, we hope, in the Race Members Club. Right, we're going to move on now to the final two groups of teams, because they're not groups, of course, because we've got two teams that there's only one power unit of, if you want to phrase it that way, which I didn't ideally, but you get what I mean. Anyway, let's talk about the Aston Martin, Scott. I suspect talking about weaknesses is going to be easy, and good luck with the strengths.
Yeah. Engine, obviously, but I mentioned it before when we were talking about Cadillac. I really don't think we should let Aston Martin off completely on the chassis side. It's weak in high speeds, and there seems to be quite a lot of time being lost there. Suzuka, I think, really badly exposed that the car itself isn't particularly great. I don't know where it would end up. My concern is if you put the best engine in that car, I still think I think it's a Q2 car at best, and it might even be marginal Q1, Q2. I don't really see. It'd be great to be proven wrong, because it would mean that it would be a lot more interesting over the next few races. I don't really see where Adrian Newey's optimism from pre-Australia about he thinks it's already basically a top 10 car, in terms of what the chassis is capable of. I don't really see any evidence of that from what we've seen in the first few weekends. So. And it's also worth pointing out that there is starting to be a few hints that some of this, chronic vibration trouble, especially when it comes to driver discomfort, but who knows if this extends to why the battery suffered so much, might not just purely be because the vibrations are so horrific on the engine side. Now, the problem is that there's only one sample set of what a Honda engine does to a car, and that is the Aston Martin. But the fact that Honda is now starting to emphasize that, everything on the dyno says it's okay, but it's when it's installed in this specific chassis that there's a problem. And that one of the countermeasures at Suzuka for some of this driver discomfort, I think, was around either the steering column or steering wheel or both. And that seemed to help. Alonso said it removed 80% of the vibrations. I'm not 100% convinced that this car, the chassis is not unproblematic, basically. And on top of that, it's heavy. So there's loads here. I would describe it as just a chronically troubled package. That is how I would describe it on the weakness side. And on the strength side, livery's quite nice.
Yeah. Ultimately, Mark, there's a few little hints of where the car's a little bit better, maybe lower down the speed range. So if we want to grasp for a clear strength, something like that.
If you're grasping at straws, you'd probably say mid-speed corners. It looked okay at certain corners in Australia, I thought. But yeah, I mean, it's horribly underdeveloped. It's like you're looking at a car that's a year behind in development, which tallies with its the late start of both the chassis and the engine programs, isn't it? But yeah, it's what, 3.5 seconds off the pace is 2 seconds of that possibly the power unit. Yeah, it's still not on the pace, is it? But very, very difficult to develop a car with a fundamental power unit shortfall as well. So I think that's going to be the first order of business before they even know where they are, really.
The strength you could generously argue, and this is a little bit similar to what we said about Williams, but a bit more emphatic, is it's absolutely nowhere near its potential as a package, and you have to twist that. It's the least worst thing about the package is that we don't actually know how good it could be, and I think for the sake of this exercise, it's okay to frame that as a strength in relative terms.
Okay, so we'll go with potential as the strength, and should we go with, was it chronically troubled? Was that your phraseology rather than purely pinning it on the power?
Something along those lines, with obviously the emphasis is on the engine.
Okay, yeah, we'll go with that. Right, let's move on to our final team, very much in the midfield, but the last up on the podcast. Mark, Audi.
Yeah, Audi's been an interesting one. It's very different car aerodynamically to most of the others. It's in concept. It's got this different front wing, different side pods without the undercut, and the big flare out at the bottom. But when you look at its performance profile, it's actually quite competitive in terms of downforce. It looks as if the main limitation at the moment is just sheer lack of top end power. It has got the other difficulty of it has a big turbo apparently, and that's contributing to its terrible starts off the start line. But I think even if you compare it, it's generally on a par with I think what did we say, the V carb, and the Haas in lap time, but it delivers its lap time in quite a different way, and it looks like the shortfall is just sheer top end horsepower, and that has of course a run on in terms of your efficiency of electrical energy harvesting and deployment. But yeah, it's not bad starting point, I would say, for a brand new manufacturer. It's we've seen it in Q3 twice already. I think with apparently Matteo Binotto is saying that the big turbo sort of problem getting it off the line is that's not something that's going to be addressed this season. But other than that, it looks like a good solid midfield point scorer.
I think considering what it's battling on the engine side, there's a not ridiculous argument based on the first 3 weekends that it's the best car in the midfield. It's upper limit, like the ceiling that we've seen has been really impressive. Like there's just moments where like, even right up to Q1, where you like the Audi will pump in a lap where everybody relevant has pretty much done a lap, and like one of its cars is in the top 6 for a bit in Q1, and you just think like that car, that core car has to be pretty damn good to be able to do that. So I don't the problem is I haven't really been able to kind of work out where the car is strongest. So I don't have anything really specific to offer on the strength there. But yeah, I would say that core engine limitation is its biggest weakness, because it's ultimately rendering its one lap potential utterly meaningless, because it's just it does seem to be that there's a 50-50 chance that the Audi ends up at the back. Well, not right at the back, but you know what I mean, going backwards on the first lap because it can't get off the line well.
Yeah, I think it's not even 50-50. It's worse than that. If you look at Bortoletto and Hulkenberg at Suzuka, they had very similar starts. And I think we've got to make starts specifically the biggest weakness, because no matter, as you say, no matter where you qualify, if you're 6 places further back, you're in trouble. And that's what's costing them the most. And that seems to be baked in for the year. Okay, maybe they can improve it a little, but it's definitely the turbo size and the start characteristics. It's not the drivers needing to do better. There's always little gains, but yeah, that's a huge problem. So we can maybe say for the strength, do you want to take a punt and say midfield downforce? Is it the midfield downforce leader, maybe?
I was going to suggest, like effective and inventive aerodynamics, because I like what they've done as well. It's a car that looks different. They've not been afraid to take risks and do and be kind of creative with it. So I think there's quite a lot of expression in that car design, and it clearly works, which is, for us, is a lovely added bonus, because the number one thing that we notice when the cars roll out is how different a car looks from something else, and then the performance follows. But obviously, in terms of what's most important, it's the other way around.
Excellent. So I think we have a full set of 11 cars. I'll do a quick recap of, we try to phrase them as snappily as we can, but obviously reality doesn't always lend itself to snappy branding. But Mercedes, strength, efficient integration of aero and harvest characteristics, weakness, deployment optimization in race. McLaren, strength, good low speed downforce, weakness, downforce deficits. Alpine, strength, the Mercedes PU, weakness, high speed understeer. Williams' strength, the aero potential, weakness, weight and traction. That's 2 technically, but the weight might go away fairly quickly. Red Bull, in quali, is the strength, weakness, mid-corner understeer, and just the whole car just not being good enough. Racing Bulls, good peak, weakness, tricky balance window, so that's particularly harsh in qualifying. Ferrari, we're going with raceability of the car, and the weakness is the horsepower deficit. Haas, strength, good drivability, downforce spread, so nice all-rounder in that regard. Weakness, qualifying pace. Cadillac, strength, just benign, predictable car. Weakness, well off on downforce. Aston Martin, we're going with potential, optimistically, and weakness, just power unit and lack of chassis development, just chronically troubled everything, I think you could say. And Audi, effective and inventive aero, to use that phrase Scott just came up with, and weakness, starts. We happy with that? I think that's a reasonable picture of the performance profile. And then, of course, the big question is now, how will that change? Because, Mark, these cars are going to change a lot as the season evolves. And Miami's probably the first inflection point for seeing those big changes.
Yeah, I think that month break is going to really be put to good use as well. So there's a lot of questions hanging in the air, particularly McLaren, I would say. They seem to be very gung-ho about how much they're bringing, while accepting that they don't know what the others are bringing. But given that they're reasonably close at the moment, they're not close enough to be troubling Mercedes really, but they're there. Mercedes know they're there. Is the 2 or 3 tenths worth of upgrade coming, and do we then see them much more in the battle? So even with the car as it was, Piastri was looking good at Suzuka until the safety car sort of disrupted his race. But I think that's probably the most intrigue. A lot of work ahead for Red Bull. I think that there's so much there that maybe we're not looking at a Miami, some magic switch. But I think in terms of the competitive order, we're looking at probably McLaren and post Miami with the engine recalibration, maybe with Ferrari as well.
And that's the thing, of course, Scott, isn't it? Everything could shift in Miami depending on what exactly the outcome is of the rule changes, because that will affect, well, we've talked about deployment characteristics and harvesting and that kind of thing. It will change the parameters, and it does have the potential to shuffle things around a little bit, doesn't it?
It does. It will be very interesting to see how different the cars look it visually as much as anything else. If you consider that the first few weeks of the season was so intense that anything the majority of teams really learned from once their cars properly started hitting the track, let's say Bahrain rather than just Barcelona, Miami is probably the first time we will see what that has actually, how that's been factored in to their development, because it's weeks of work to be able to take something from, oh, this is how it's worked on track, or this is what we've seen on someone else's car, and then you need to recreate it, understand it, build it. That can't happen from pre-season testing to Australia, and then if you can't get it for Australia, you've got China a week later and Japan just a week apart. So Miami will see the first really fruits of the labor of months of work. Basically, it won't just be people have got off the back of Japan and gone, oh God, oh, thank God the race did that podcast where we worked out how bad we are. Let's quickly knock up an upgrade for Miami. Obviously, this goes back weeks beyond that. And actually, it will also be an opportunity for a lot of teams to dig deep into some things that they haven't really been able to understand properly. Like, for example, something we didn't discuss with McLaren, which you could have made a case for being a weakness, but maybe is at the moment just a bit too intangible: reliability. McLaren obviously didn't get two cars in the start in China, and then of course Lando Norris seemed to lose another battery immediately in Japan after that was replaced. So trying to work out exactly where the problem lies there. Is it a supplier issue on the Mercedes side, or is there something that McLaren are doing in terms of the installation or the operation of it? I think this kind of gap will be useful for them to know. So hopefully by the time we get to Miami, we'll have a clearer picture there. And who knows, maybe we'll be shuffling out one of their weaknesses and replacing it with a reliability one, or it might just be a non-issue and they'll be absolutely fine for the rest of the season. They can showcase all of that lovely car goodness they're working on.
That's the great thing. There's so much that's going to change as the season progresses. You've got the ADUO, everyone's favourite acronym, for the engine catch-up mechanism when that's triggered for potentially some of the power unit suppliers. So there's lots that's still going to change. We've got the early picture of testing and these first three races, and it's going to be fast moving. That's the great thing about rule changes, regardless of all the other chatter and talk and problems with the rules and that kind of thing. A rule change makes for an interesting season when it comes to this kind of thing. So thanks very much, Scott and Mark, for your insight. Long gap we've got before Miami, but we're going to keep on going. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.